For 2,555 nights, the most feared man in South Korea had listened to the world bury him. He could not open his eyes, he could not lift a finger, but he could hear every whispered lie beside his hospital bed. His brother counting his empire, his fiancée laughing about the wedding gown she had already returned, his most trusted lieutenant reading obituaries out loud like bedtime stories. 99,999 doctors had passed through room 1408 of the Seongbuk Neural Research Wing. Every one of them had signed the same word into his chart. Hopeless. They were wrong. He was waiting. He was waiting for one small mistake, one open door, one careless second, one voice that did not know it was speaking to a corpse. And on a rainy Tuesday in late September, that mistake finally walked through his door, carrying a takeout bag and a broken heart. Before we step into room 1408 with her, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happens in the next 3 minutes of this story will not let you look away. The rain fell on Seongbuk-dong the way old debts fall on quiet families, steady, cold, and impossible to argue with. Amara Johnson pulled her thin raincoat tighter across her chest and turned off Disagwan Road onto the narrow service lane behind Seongbuk Neural Research Hospital. In her right hand, she carried a paper bag stamped with the small blue crane logo of Halmione's Kitchen. Inside the bag were 2 lidded bowls of samgyetang, a small container of kimchi, and a folded receipt that Mrs. Beck, her boss, had asked her to deliver personally to the VIP nursing station on the 14th floor. Amara was 26 years old. She was 5 feet 7 inches tall. Her skin was the deep, warm brown of the wet cedar bark on the trees along the hospital driveway, and her hair, twisted into a low bun under a plastic rain cap, had begun 3 months ago to show the first faint silver strand at her temple that she had not yet mentioned to her mother. She had come to Seoul at 22 with a demo album, a 2-year student visa, and the specific stubborn hope of a Nashville girl who had never taken no from anyone. 4 years later, she worked 2 restaurant shifts, 1 call center shift on Saturdays, and sang, when she sang at all, into the ventilation grill of the studio apartment she shared with a Filipino nurse named Marisol. She was not unhappy. She was not happy either. She was most nights tired in a way that felt older than she was. The service door slid open on its own, warm hospital air breathing out into the cold. Amara stepped inside. The freight elevator smelled of disinfectant and the ghost of somebody's ramyeon lunch. On the 14th floor, the corridor stretched pale and long, lit by that particular blue-white hospital light that made everyone look faintly dead. She had walked this hallway 47 times in the past year, ever since Mrs. Beck had signed a small catering contract with the private wing. The security guard at the desk, an older man named Officer Kwan, lifted a hand without looking up from his phone. Late tonight, Amara C. Kitchen was slow. Rain. Room 1408. Nurse Chang wants the soup first. She nodded. She turned left. She passed the little glass-walled lounge where 3 interns were arguing quietly about a heart transplant timeline. She passed the vending machine that had eaten her 2001 last Thursday. And she stopped, as she always stopped for a small, superstitious half-second, at the door of room 1408. She had never been inside. Nobody was allowed inside room 1408 except a rotation of 6 vetted nurses, 4 hand-picked doctors, and on the last Sunday of each month, a small, silver-haired woman in a black coat who arrived and left without speaking to anyone. Amara knew, the way everyone in Seoul knew, who lay behind that door. Kang Min-jae, 39 years old, head of what had once been the Baek Ho Group and was now, officially, a chain of legitimate logistics companies and, unofficially, the largest and quietest criminal organization on the peninsula. Comatose since a car explosion outside the Grand Chosin Hotel on his own wedding night, September 14th, 7 years ago. Fed by tube, turned every 4 hours, monitored by 7 redundant machines. Alive technically, in the same way a locked house with the lights on was alive. She kept walking. Nurse Chang met her at the station and lifted the samgyetang out of the bag with a grateful sigh. "Bless you, child. 12-hour shift and my sugar is on the floor." She pressed a 5,001 bill into Amara's palm, closed her fingers around it, and shooed her back toward the elevator. Amara had already turned to go when the cleaning robot at the end of the corridor emitted a soft, apologetic chirp. The robot was a squat white cylinder, the kind that mopped floors on a set path from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. It had that night encountered a medical cart parked slightly out of position outside room 1408. Its programming, thoughtful but not brilliant, had tried to route around the cart 3 times and had, on the fourth attempt, bumped it gently at the wrong angle. A stainless steel water pitcher on the top shelf tipped, tilted, and fell. The pitcher hit the tile with a wet crash. Water fanned out across the hallway. Officer Kwan was already on his feet. Nurse Chang was already reaching for the intercom. Amara, who had spent 4 years in Seoul, learning that being useful was the fastest way to be forgiven for being foreign, was already crouching by the janitor's cabinet 3 doors down, pulling out 2 towels and a mop. "I'll wipe. You keep eating," she called back to Nurse Chang. 2 seconds. She sopped up the worst of it in the hallway. The door of room 1408 had swung 6 inches open when the pitcher had gone down. Water had run across the threshold. She hesitated exactly 1 heartbeat. Then she stepped inside. The room was dim. 1 low lamp burned in the corner. A single wall of monitors glowed pale green, their soft, rhythmic beeps stitching the silence together. And in the center of the room, on a white bed that looked oddly small for the legend it held, lay a man. He was not what she had expected. He was thinner than the newspapers made him look. His black hair had been trimmed close to his scalp by someone patient. His skin was pale in the way of people who had not seen sunlight for a very long time, but it was not gray. It was the color of pressed rice paper. His hands lay flat and still on the folded sheet, palms down, the fingers long and unmarked. There was a small crescent scar at the base of his left thumb that she noticed absurdly first. She crouched. She wiped the water from the tile. She wiped the leg of the bed frame. She was rising to leave when she saw the photograph. It had slipped from somewhere, the nightstand perhaps, or the pocket of a visitor's coat left folded on a chair, and lay face up beside her foot. It was a small, square print. In it, a young man of about 20 stood in front of a bakery in what looked like insadong, one arm slung around the shoulders of a girl not older than 6. The girl wore a yellow raincoat 2 sizes too big for her. She was laughing. The young man was not laughing. He was looking down at her the way you look at a small living creature you have decided, without asking anyone's permission, to protect. Amara turned the photograph over, 2 lines in careful blue ink. "To my little sister, I will always protect you. Opa." Something moved in her chest. She did not know what to do with it. She had not cried in 9 months, since the phone call about her mother's biopsy results, and she was not going to cry in room 1408. She placed the photograph gently on the nightstand, face up, angled slightly toward the bed so that if the man on it ever opened his eyes, he would see it first. "You must be tired," she said softly. She did not know she was going to speak. The words simply arrived. 7 years is a long time to be somewhere no one can reach you. She looked at him, at the still, watchful, unreadable geometry of his face. "Whoever you're waiting for," she whispered, "I hope you find your way back." She leaned forward to nudge the photo into a straighter angle. Her sneakers, wet from the hallway, slid a 1/4 inch on the tile. Her balance tipped forward. Her left hand caught the edge of the mattress. Her mouth brushed for less than a second the cool skin at the corner of his jaw. She jerked upright, her face burning. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I am so, so sorry." She grabbed her mop and towels. She stepped out of the room. She pulled the door shut behind her with the exaggerated care of a woman who had just, accidentally, kissed a comatose criminal on the cheek. She walked to the elevator. She kept her face down until the door closed. She rode. All 14 floors, imagining in vivid detail how she was going to explain herself to Mrs. Beck in the morning. She was in the freight lobby when the alarms began. She heard them faintly. First, a distant high electronic wail somewhere above her. She did not connect it at first to anything. She was pushing the service door open, thinking about the last bus back to Sillim-dong when the second wave began. Nurses running, a door slamming, a code called over the PA in that specific unhurried voice that Korean hospitals used for the emergencies they did not want the public to know about. She looked back once, then she stepped into the rain and hurried toward the bus stop. 20 minutes later, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday in late September, in the private neurological wing of Seongbuk Research Hospital, Kang Min-jae opened his eyes for the first time in 7 years and 3 days. He did not sit up. He did not gasp. He did not, as later dramatized reports would suggest, immediately demand a phone. He simply blinked twice at the ceiling of room 1408. His pupils, which had not tracked a moving object since the wedding night, adjusted to the low lamplight. He turned his head 1 degree toward the nightstand. He saw the photograph. He saw the photograph, and something in his throat, which had not made a sound of its own volition in 84 months, produced a small dry noise that the attending doctor, running through the door at that exact moment, would later transcribe in his emergency notes as a laugh or possibly a sob. The doctor, whose name was Dr. Hwang Sun-woo, would swear afterward, on record and off, that the first thing the awakened Kang Min-jae did was not ask where he was, or who was president, or what year it was. The first thing he did was turn his eyes to the frantic young resident hooking a fresh IV line into his arm and speak, in a voice thin as tissue paper but perfectly steady. "The woman," he said, "find her." The next morning at 6:14 a.m., the head of hospital security, a former Army colonel named Jang Byung-ho, sat down in front of a monitor and began reviewing the corridor footage from the 14th floor. By 7:02 a.m., he had a still image of a black woman in a green Halmione's kitchen raincoat wiping water from the floor outside room 1408. By 7:19 a.m., he had her name, her address, her employer, and the phone number of her older brother in Memphis. By 8:31 a.m., a black sedan with tinted windows was parked outside a fourth-floor walk-up in Sillim-dong, and a very calm man in a very expensive suit was climbing the concrete stairs. Amara opened the door in an oversized t-shirt and yesterday's mascara. She had one earbud in. She was listening to a voice memo her little brother Elijah had sent her from his dorm at Vanderbilt at 3 in the morning his time. The man in the suit inclined his head. "Miss Johnson, my employer would like to speak with you today. Please dress warmly, there is coffee in the car." She stared at him. "I did not mean to," she said. He did not react. He did not, she suspected later, know what she was talking about. He only said, "He is not angry, he is grateful." She did not believe him, but she went. She went because the other choice was to run, and running took money she did not have. She went because Marisol had already left for her shift, and there was no one to see her be brave or foolish. She went because, deep under the small, hard fear in her chest, was a curiosity she could not, in honesty, deny. She wanted to see him again, awake this time. The car took her to a low, modern building in Pyeongdong that she had passed 100 times without noticing. Inside, a private elevator, a hallway with soft gray carpet, a door that opened without her touching it, and at the far end of a long room with tall windows looking out over the gray city, a man in a plain black turtleneck seated in a wheelchair with a cashmere blanket across his lap. He looked up when she entered. She stopped where she was. His eyes were the darkest brown she had ever seen. There was still a faint hollowness in his cheeks. His hands, folded on top of the blanket, were the same still, unmarked hands she had seen in room 1408, only warmer now, only alive. "Miss Johnson," Kang Min-jae said. His voice was low, careful, like a man who had not yet trusted it in daylight. "Please, sit." She sat. There was a small folding table between them. On it, a stainless steel thermos of coffee, 2 ceramic cups, and face up, the photograph. He touched it lightly with one finger. "My sister," he said. "She was 6 there. Her name was Kang Ji-ah. She died 8 months later of an accident I did not prevent. I have carried that photograph in my wallet for 22 years, Miss Johnson. It was in my pocket the night of the explosion. Someone placed it on my nightstand 3 years ago, and I have not been able to find out who. I am not asking you if it was you. I already know it was not, but you moved it. You spoke to me. You said the correct words, and then something happened that no doctor in this hospital can explain, and if I do not sit across from you and shake your hand, Miss Johnson, I will spend the rest of my life wondering if I imagined the voice that woke me." Amara did not know what her face was doing. She reached across the table. She put her hand into his. His fingers were cool. He held on for perhaps 3 seconds, no longer, and then let go. "Tell me what you heard," she said quietly before she could stop herself. "In there, all those years." He looked at her. For the first time in the 14 minutes since she had entered the room, Kang Min-jae, the man the newspapers called the Black Tiger of Gangnam, looked for one small, unguarded second afraid. "Everything," he said. He told her, over the course of the next hour, only the pieces he had already decided to share. He told her that his younger brother, Kang Hyun-woo, had spent the last 84 months moving assets, buying loyalty, and preparing to inherit an empire that had, on paper, no available heir. He told her that his fiancée, Han Soo-jin, had married a Belgian arms broker 11 months into his coma, and now lived in a villa outside Antwerp. He told her that on the night of the explosion, in the 7 seconds between the ignition and the fire, he had seen a figure in the parking garage he could not identify. A small figure, standing perfectly still under a fluorescent light, watching him die. He did not tell her, that first day, that when she had touched his hand a moment ago, the figure in his memory had, for the first time in 7 years, turned its head. He did not tell her because he did not yet believe it himself. He walked her back to the car in the early afternoon. He walked slowly, one hand on the arm of a young man who introduced himself as Baek Do-ha, Chief of Internal Security. At the curb, Min-jae paused. He looked at her for a long moment. "Do you sing, Miss Johnson?" She blinked. "How did you— your voice? I have listened to a great many voices in the last 7 years. Yours does not sound like a person who has only ever waited tables." "I used to," she said, "a long time ago." "Nothing," he said quietly, "is as long as it seems while it is happening." He nodded once. He got back into his own car. She got into hers. She did not, at that moment, know that Baek Do-ha had, on his employer's specific instruction, that morning quietly wired the full outstanding balance of Grace Johnson's oncology account at Vanderbilt University Medical Center from an anonymous foundation that had not existed the previous evening. Her mother would learn about it 3 days later. Amara would not learn about it for 4 weeks. The world did not give either of them those 4 weeks in peace. On the 6th day after Min-jae's awakening, a black market broker in Vladivostok tried to sell a set of encrypted account codes to a Kazakh intermediary. The codes, he claimed, had been extracted from the memory of a Korean patient in a Seoul hospital and were worth, if properly used, in the region of 20 billion American dollars. The broker was found the following morning in the trunk of a Lada with a note pinned to his shirt in Hangul. The note read only, "He is awake." The codes moved themselves. On the 8th day, Kang Hyun-woo called an emergency meeting of the Baek-ho Inner Council at a private tea room in Bukchon. 6 of the 9 chairs at the table stood empty. 2 of the 3 men present sweated visibly through their silk shirts. The third, a small silver-haired accountant named Yoon Jae-hyun, spoke in a voice so calm that Hyun-woo, who had known him for 15 years, understood at once that the accountant had already chosen a side and that the side was not his. Photographs, interviews, financial reports, court transcripts, 2 novels he had never read, a magazine cover from Tokyo that he had not known existed, a photograph of him at 19, taken from a distance on a street in Incheon he had not walked down in a decade and a half, a photograph of him at 23 leaving a courthouse, a photograph of him at 29 in profile at a black-tie dinner he could not remember attending, a photograph of him at 34, 3 months ago in the sunlight outside her bookshop. On the desk, in a small wooden frame, sat a photograph of a boy and a girl on the roof of a laundry, under a low autumn moon. He picked it up. He knew the girl's face. He had, on the day he had disappeared into the criminal world at 19, taken a copy of that same photograph and burned it in a sink because he had believed that letting himself keep even one image of her would eventually kill her. He stood in the small room for a long time. He was still standing there when he heard the door of the apartment open and her light step in the hallway and her voice, cheerful, unaware, calling his name in the small, careful way she always did. "Min-jae, is that you?" He turned. She was standing in the doorway of the small room. She had a bag of groceries in one hand. She saw the photograph in his fingers. She saw his face. The bag of groceries slipped to the floor. She did not seem to notice. He said very quietly, Seo Yan. She closed her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rain began gently on the window of the small room. She opened her eyes. They were wet. I did not want it to be like this, she said. You knew, he said, the night you found me, in the rain. I knew before that. I have known for 15 years. You watched. I watched. Why did you not? He began, and then he could not finish the sentence, because there were, he understood, at least 4 different endings to it, and none of them were the ending he wanted. Why did I not come to you? She said gently. Because you left. Because you left without a word, and for 15 years I believed that you had chosen to. Because by the time I was old enough to imagine that a 19-year-old boy might have had reasons, you had already become someone I was not sure was still the boy I knew. Because I was afraid, because I was ashamed, because I did not want to be a woman who chased her own ghost. She stepped into the room. She reached out and took the photograph from his hand. She looked at it. She smiled, a small, tired smile. And because, Min-jae, she said, when I finally found you again, when you fell against my back door in the rain, you did not know me. And I understood in that moment that if I told you, I would be asking you to love me because you had once loved me, and I did not want that. I wanted you to know me now. And if you decided, knowing me now, that you wanted the girl I had been, then the girl I had been would come back. He did not answer for a long time. Ji-eun is not your name, he said at last. It is now. My father, the chairman, insisted I take a new name when the adoption was finalized. He wanted a clean start for me, he said. I let him. I was a child. I did not know what I was letting go of. She looked up at him. But Seo Yan is still in there, she said. She has been in there the whole time. She has been running a small bookshop and waiting to see if the boy she loved would ever one day walk back through the door. He crossed the room. He did not embrace her, not yet. He stood in front of her. He put his hand gently against her cheek. She closed her eyes and leaned into it, and he thought, with a clarity that felt almost like grief, that no one had touched him like this in 15 years, and no one had let him touch them like this in 15 years, and that the reason was not that women were rare in his life, but that this specific woman had been the only one his hand had ever recognized. I have to tell you something, he said quietly, about your father. She opened her eyes. I know, she said. You know? I have known for 6 months. He stared at her. There is a fireproof box in the back of that closet, she said, nodding to the small closet in the corner. It contains copies of every document your Miss Han showed you this morning. It contains additional documents she does not know exist. It contains a full audit of the shipping network your father died trying to expose, and the names of the 12 men who have kept that network running since. 6 months ago, I found the first of those documents in a locked drawer in my father's office. I have spent 6 months, Min-jae, quietly making copies. I did not know then what I intended to do with them, but I knew I could not leave them where they were. He looked at her the way a man looks at a person he has never, until this moment, truly seen. You were going to expose him, he said, alone. I was going to expose him. I did not yet know whether alone. And me, when I fell against your door. When you fell against my door, Min-jae, she said quietly, I understood that I had never been going to do it alone. I had been waiting for you, even when I did not know I was. He kissed her. He kissed her the way a man kisses a woman he has loved for 15 years without permission, and has been given, at last, permission. She kissed him back the way a woman kisses a man she has waited for, and has decided, at last, that the waiting was worth it. Rain fell on the small window. The photograph of a boy and a girl on a roof in Incheon lay between them on the desk. Somewhere below, in a small shop that smelled of paper and tea, the bell over the door rang softly in a draft, as though the shop itself were sighing in relief. The next 14 days were not gentle. They planned quietly. They moved copies of the documents into a lawyer's office and a foreign embassy and 2 encrypted servers. Han Mi-rae, terrified and steady, gave a sworn statement in the offices of an international prosecutor. Min-jae dismantled one by one the pieces of his own organization that had, over the years, been quietly infiltrated by Chairman Lee's men. He did it without noise. He did it, for the first time in his life, without vengeance. He did it because Ji-eun had asked him, on the second night, to try to leave as few children fatherless as he could. He listened. Chairman Lee learned on the morning of the 15th day that a warrant was being prepared. He acted first. He took Ji-eun from the bookshop at 11 in the morning by the simple method of walking in as her father and asking her to come with him. She went. She went because she had prepared for this too. Because she was Han Seo-yeon and Yoo Ji-eun, and she had in her locket a small tracking device that Min-jae had given her 3 days earlier and had not needed to explain. The confrontation took place 6 hours later in a half-built hotel that Chairman Lee owned on the outskirts of Seoul. The building was empty. The floors were bare concrete. There were only 3 functioning elevators. Min-jae arrived alone, unarmed by request. Chairman Lee waited for him on the 32nd floor, with Ji-eun seated in a folding chair beside him, unhurt, unafraid, and holding, unnoticed by the chairman, a small silver locket loosely in her fingers. The chairman was a small man with silver hair and the polished manners of a lifelong host. He spoke when Min-jae stepped off the elevator without turning around. "I would have preferred," he said mildly, "that we never had this conversation, Kang Min-jae. I have been fond of you. I hoped you would remain useful. You killed my father." "I did. He was a fool. He believed the law would protect the women he found. It would not have. It never has. I offered him money. I offered him a position. He refused. He was going to speak to the newspapers, so I ended him. I have not regretted the decision. You raised my woman." "I did, and I have loved her. That at least I did not fake." Ji-eun did not look at either of them. She looked at the concrete floor. Her hand tightened once around the locket. "You knew who she was," Min-jae said. "I knew who her mother was. Her mother was a woman I had a brief acquaintance with in my youth. When I learned 25 years ago that the child in a certain orphanage was hers and mine, I took her, not for love." "Yes. Then these are not us." "No," he said, "they are not." The truth, when Baek Do-ha's people finally unearthed it in the archives of a defunct church shelter in Itaewon, was smaller and sadder than either of them had feared. 2 infants had been recovered in October 1999 from a shipping container intercepted at Incheon port. One had died of pneumonia within a week. The other had been placed with a family in Gwangju under a new name. Min-jae's mother, then in the early years of a private crusade she had never told her sons about, had photographed the babies in the clinic before their transfer, and had recorded them in her private ledger under the names of the 2 children she herself had lost, Jia, her daughter, and Amma, the daughter of the friend she had failed to save. She had done it, the ledger said, so that if anyone ever came looking for those little girls, they would be found, not so that anyone would believe 22 years later that they were her own. Amara closed her eyes for a long moment. "Your mother," she said, "was a better woman than either of them deserved." "She was. She kept my name alive. She kept both of you alive." They sat for a while in the small tea room without speaking. The rain, which had been gentle when Amara arrived, thickened against the paper windows. Somewhere in the house below, a phone rang once and was answered. "I want to see him," Amara said quietly. "My father, please." "Tomorrow," Min-jae said. "He asked for 1 day to sleep in a bed. He has not slept in a bed since 1999. She nodded. She wiped her face again. She looked at him across the low table. "And what do you want, Kang Min-jae?" He looked at her. "I want," he said carefully, "to be a man who deserves to sit across from you 6 months from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, if that is what you decide. I do not know how to be that man yet. I have not been anything for 7 years, and before that I was not much worth being, but I would like the chance to try if you will let me try." She looked at him for a long time. Then very slowly, she reached across the table and took his hand. Kwame Ose walked out of the Soksho facility on a Thursday morning in early November. Amara flew up from Seoul to meet him. She wore the yellow raincoat from the photograph, a coincidence Grace Johnson had cried about on the phone the previous evening. Kwame was a tall man, thinner than he should have been, with kind eyes and a small tremor in his left hand that would, his doctors said, ease with time and food. He did not, when he saw her, speak. He simply held out both his hands, and she put her face into them, and he stood there for a long time with his forehead pressed against the top of her head and his shoulders shaking silently. Grace Johnson flew in 4 days later. The three of them ate dinner together in a small restaurant in Hongdae on a rainy Saturday night. Grace, who had spent 25 years quietly refusing to remarry, and Kwame, who had spent 25 years quietly imagining a woman he had never met, sat across from each other in a booth by the window and did not at first say very much. Amara watched them. She thought with a small ache and a small joy that some stories were not hers to finish, and that the finishing of them was not required to be beautiful. Grace's cancer, the doctors in Nashville reported in December, was in full remission. The Bayek Ho Group announced at the beginning of February the dissolution of its largest holding company. The public was told this was a restructuring. The truth, as reported 18 months later in an award-winning investigation by the Hankyoreh, was that Min Jae had personally overseen the transfer of $11 billion in shadow assets to a consortium of humanitarian foundations, 3 of which quietly reopened investigations into missing persons cases from the late 1990s. He also personally, and without fanfare, closed 6 shipping routes his father had opened. He replaced them with nothing. His father's ghost, if it had a ghost, did not, so far as anyone knew, complain. Hyun Woo was sentenced in April. He would not be out until his 50s. Han Soo-jin was extradited in June. Yoon Jae-hyun, the small silver-haired accountant, retired to a fishing village near Tongyong and was, by all reports, learning to paint. On a warm Saturday morning in early June, exactly 9 months after a cleaning robot had knocked a water pitcher off a cart on the 14th floor of Seongbuk Neural Research Hospital, Kang Min-jae parked a plain black sedan on Daeseguan Road and walked alone into a small restaurant 3 doors down from where Halmione's kitchen used to be. The restaurant was called Grace's Room. It was owned by a woman named Amara Johnson, who had reopened it 2 months earlier with the modest inheritance her mother had insisted on giving her, and who was, at that particular moment, standing behind the counter arguing gently in 3 languages with a supplier who had, once again, brought her the wrong kind of gochujang. She saw him. She stopped arguing. She handed the phone to her assistant. She wiped her hands on her apron. He walked to the counter. He set a small blue velvet box on the wood between them. He did not open it. He did not kneel. He did not, in fact, say a single one of the sentences he had rehearsed in front of the mirror in Namyangju that morning. 7 years in the dark, he said quietly, and the only time I ever actually woke up was the moment you walked into that room. Amara looked down at the box. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright. Kang Min-jae, she said, you are a dramatic man. I know. I've been waiting all week for you to come in and try the soup. I know that too. She reached across the counter. She did not open the box, not yet. She simply put her hand over his and left it there, palm to palm, in the warm, bright kitchen of a small restaurant on a quiet Seoul street, where a photograph of a Ghanaian man and his American daughter and a Korean widow smiled from a frame above the register, and where somewhere in a back room a small speaker played, very softly, a Nashville woman singing a song she had not sung in public for 4 long years. Outside, the rain was gone. Sunlight fell across Daeseguan Road in wide, clean stripes. Inside, in a room that smelled of garlic and ginger and lemon peel and hope, the sleeping tiger of Seoul finally at last opened his eyes. If this story held you from the very first minute all the way to the last, do this one small thing. Smash that like button. Share this video with someone who believes that quiet kindness can shake the world, and subscribe so you never miss the next story of danger, love, and impossible destiny. Tell us in the comments, if you had 1 minute alone in room 1408, what would you have whispered to the sleeping man on the bed? We read every single comment, and the story that wins our hearts might just become our next episode. Your next unforgettable story is only 1 click away.